noisy, dusty. Making garments, all these bales of fabric, it creates a lot of dust, can make it quite hard to breathe. Rows and rows of machinists, people packing clothes, people snipping loose threads off clothes, lots and lots of people working from dawn to dusk.
Even before it collapsed, the Rana Plaza building in Bangladesh was an unpleasant place to work. The garment workers, mostly women, had complained about the conditions in the factories, but were made to continue working, even though managers knew the building was unsafe.
There were basically too many floors. There were too many people packed into that building. There was too many machineries and too many bales of cloth.
Just the day before, cracks had appeared in the building, and shops and a bank on the lower floors were evacuated. The following morning, garment workers stood outside in protest, but they were made to return to work.
The building collapsed at around 9 in the morning. Thousands of tons of metal and concrete came crashing down, burying hundreds of workers.
On the 24th of April 2013, the tower block in Bangladesh collapsed. It killed 1,134 people and left thousands more with life-changing injuries. For people in the UK and around the world, the Rana Plaza disaster brought to their attention, perhaps for the first time, just how their clothes were being made. And their outrage made fashion brands promise to do better.
What we saw at Rana Plaza is proof that the fashion industry values the clothes that it makes more than it values the lives of the people who make them.
A decade on, how much has the fashion industry really changed? I'm Sally Lockwood, and this is the Sky News Daily.
The Rana Plaza factory complex was an 8-storey building in an area of Dhaka called Savar in Bangladesh. And within that 8 stories, there were 5 different garment factories.
Tansy Hoskins is a journalist and writer who's written extensively on the fashion industry. For her book, The Anti-Capitalist Book of Fashion, she spoke to survivors of the Rana Plaza collapse about what happened that day.
It was an extremely unsafe building. There were basically too many floors. There were too many people packed into that building. There was too many machineries and too many bales of cloth. So on the morning before the building collapsed, cracks appeared in Rana Plaza, and other premises that were in that building were evacuated. The next morning, when the workers came to work, they pointed out the cracks. They said that the building was dangerous, and they said they didn't want to go to work. And so there was an argument on the forecourt between the managers of the garment factories and between the workers. And eventually, the managers said, if you don't go in and go to work, we're going to dock you a month's pay. And you can imagine losing a month's pay for a garment worker in Bangladesh is an impossibility. Most of these garment workers were young women. Most of them were supporting families. So people were forced to go into this building. A few hours later, the supporting pillars cracked, and in about 90 seconds, the entire building fell in upon itself, leading to the death of 1,138 people and injury, both physical and psychological, of many thousands more. This was one of the worst instances of industrial homicide ever, and is one of the worst unintended structural failures of a building in modern history. And it happened right at the heart of the fashion industry.
This event was so significant and so shocking because it emerged that clothing for big high street names here in the UK and in other Western countries was being made in this factory where safety was being so disregarded and workers were being quite clearly exploited.
Yes, you're totally right. Like if you walk down, a sort of typical British high street and you pass, the shops that were at Rana Plaza that were at that time manufacturing. So Primark, Matalan, Benetton, Mango, and then C&A, which many of us remember. And then, from overseas, as Walmart, the Children's Place were amongst the brands.
What do you know about how much big brands and retailers knew what was going on when it came to the conditions in these factories.
An extraordinary thing that emerged is that Primark went on to admit that it had done two safety audits of Rana Plaza, and that they had decided that that building was a perfectly safe and viable place for them to be manufacturing clothes. So yes, Primark quite clearly, knew what factory they were manufacturing in.
But also, charities and garment workers had been warning for a while that something like this could happen, hadn't they?
It was really frustrating because many, many people, both in Bangladesh and around the world, had been saying that something like Rana Plaza was going to happen. It wasn't the first disaster in Bangladesh. There had been a string of factory fires. And I think, trade unions in Bangladesh and campaigners around the world just felt like the industry was not listening to what people were saying about how unsafe so many of these factories were. And even after Rana Plaza happened, even after you got over 1,000 dead bodies, the industry was really not, in my opinion, very good at responding in the way that it should have. Like, it took 2 years of really quite rigorous campaigning and people writing articles and holding protests and really sort of pressuring CEOs, like 2 years to get compensation for the people and the family who were caught up in this like tragedy. And like, I'm sure we'll go on to talk about the Bangladesh Accord, but many of the brands had to be dragged kicking and screaming to the table to sign up to even just the most basic safety precautions in their factories.
What has actually changed since?
The main thing that happened was that for the first time in the fashion industry, you had a legally binding agreement on factory safety, which was the Bangladesh Accord on fire and building safety. It has definitely worked. It meant that there were inspections of over 1,600 factories. And I have no doubt that without the Bangladesh Accord, there would have been more Rana Plazas. Some of the things that the inspections uncovered were horrendous. Buildings where there were no fire escapes and where there were creches on, on the 10th floor and things like this, like structurally unsound buildings where thousands of people were working. So yeah, I have no doubt that the Bangladesh Accord saved tens of thousands of lives.
The Bangladesh Accord has, as you say, improved safety conditions, but exploitation still exists. Explain to us how much that is still a problem and what needs to change there.
Yes, you are. I mean, you're completely right. I mean, it's this for me is one of the big tragedies of Rana Plaza is that this was supposed to be the watershed moment in which the fashion industry truly changed. But the truth of the matter is that yes, while the buildings are safer, conditions for workers have not truly changed. Garment workers in Bangladesh do not earn a decent minimum wage. They do not earn a living wage at all. So at the moment, workers are paid 75 US American dollars per month. And what would actually be a living wage would be about 3 times that much. So people are still extremely poor. The right to have a trade union or to have any kind of freedom of association in factories is still incredibly restricted. And what we saw over the pandemic and what we've repeatedly seen is that when garment workers try to stand up for themselves, try to get a better wage, is that the Bangladeshi state gets involved and responds very heavily. So, we continuously see workers being shot dead during protests and workers being arrested during protests and workers being beaten up both by sort of hired thugs and the police in Bangladesh. So yeah, it's not a good situation at all. There's still so much that needs to be improved.
What are retailers and big brands doing about this treatment of workers that are being paid $75 a month who want to protest their rights?
Making a lot of money, essentially. not much that they can be proud of, in my opinion. Still, many brands don't want to sign up to the accord. They still kind of relying upon like voluntary certification schemes. They're not in the corner of the workers. They're not in the corner of trade unions. That's not why they're in Bangladesh. Like, they're in Bangladesh to make maximum profits, to make their shareholders happy. It's really the bottom line that comes first in the fashion industry.
I mean, I've been working for Mother of Pearl for 16 years, actually, showing my age.
Amy Powney is the creative director of sustainable fashion brand Mother of Pearl, and she also campaigns for a fairer and greener fashion industry.
I guess I've always been passionate about sustainability and ethics. When I was at university, I sort of knew quite a lot about sweatshop issues, etc. But kind of as my career progressed, as did fast fashion and the sheer consumption and the way we produce, and climate change is becoming a bigger topic within the industry because of its impact. So I guess the more I was following, the more knowledge I had, the more I was learning, the more I was becoming very uneasy with the industry that I was in. I just couldn't do it anymore, actually. And it was really kind of make a change or break away. So I decided to set out on a challenge to see if I could make the brand sustainable.
It blows my mind that you could buy a dress in the UK for less than a tenner that's made in Bangladesh. Explain to us what's involved in that garment arriving here in the UK and being sold so cheaply.
Yeah, so let's suggest it's a cotton piece. Let's look at the cotton farmers and the cotton pickers. So they need to obviously grow a crop and pick it. And if we're talking about a £10 dress to us, and the markup that a, let's say, high street store has put on, so they wouldn't be, if they're selling it for £10, that means they bought it, let's say, for £5. It's not always the maths, but let's say it is. So we're talking about £5 worth of supply chain. You've got to pay a farmer, you've got to pay a spinner, a weaver, and a manufacturer, and all the shipping and transportation and packaging in between it. I mean, if you just break that down potentially into 5 stages, and then you talk about £1 per stage, which also isn't how it works, but just as a kind of overview, that means potentially, and we're talking pence that these people are getting paid. And so how on earth could people live like that?
And I think something that, many people may not realise is that some brands don't even bother trying to resell clothing that's been returned to them because it's just not worth their while, and they end up burning it or throwing it away. I mean, the waste is huge.
Yes, I think we look at the brand level, people, because it's so cheap, getting something back, reprocessing it, putting it back through a warehouse and reselling it is more expensive than the item itself. So they're burning it. I mean, it kind of shows how little we're paying for these garments and kind of what the value of them are to us as consumers and to brands.
A lot of big brands are also now trying to emulate what you've done with Mother of Pearl, trying to be more sustainable, more environmentally friendly, realizing that a lot of consumers now care about that too. How much is that working, and how much is it greenwashing?
It's a very good question. I would say for the most part, unfortunately, it is greenwashing. That doesn't sort of suggest that people's intentions aren't necessarily good. I mean, obviously, we know in some big corporations they're not, but I think in some other brands they are. I just think the sheer complexity of supply chains and just the sheer consumption that's happening in fashion.
Just to clarify, the term greenwashing is used to describe companies which effectively make claims to sustainability, for example, in fashion, by advertising their use of recycled materials in their clothing, but in reality, their brand isn't as eco-friendly as they make out. So, Amy, how do fashion brands go about making real change?
We have to talk about degrowth. We have to talk about restructuring your entire business. We have to rethink the entire fashion industry. And so I think a lot of people are suggesting that they're making sustainable collections, etc., by buying, let's say, a slightly better fibre, but it's just not enough. And that's a kind of tiny sticky plaster. It's like carbon offsetting. People talk about that, and they're just small ways to slightly improve things, and it's systemic change we really need. So unfortunately, a lot of it is just not good enough and not big enough.
Some may say, well, if these people in Bangladesh didn't work for these garment factories, they may not work at all.
Yeah, I mean, that is a very good point. And I talk about this a lot because I think, if you ask a lot of people in these supply chains, this job or no job, they will plead for this job because it's a way to survive. So I don't think the answer is just simply to kind of stop everything. We need systemic change and we need legislation and we need things to happen kind of incrementally. Because, yeah, for sure, there's been an instant in my life where I found out a cotton farm, had children picking the cotton, and your kind of instinct is instantly to, I have children myself. You think, oh my God, how can this happen? But the truth is, those children probably don't have a school to go to. They don't have anywhere else to go to, and that probably is their livelihood for the rest of their lives. So we can't take away the value that these jobs have for these people because they need that as much as we need our jobs. So it's not completely just stopping. It's about paying the correct money for what we've got. And I think there's a balance and a shift that, if we paid more but produced less, we would see those, nothing needs to change because people could work less hours. You could be producing better quality. We could have less of a footprint, but we could still be paying the correct money. So there is a way to balance it, but it is very complicated. It sounds simple, but it's economic, it's international, and it's political as much as anything else.
Yeah, totally. Like so many things, it's not one-dimensional at all. But for listeners who maybe want to do their bit and try and be more sustainable, what would be your advice to them in terms of how to support the industry to be more ethical and more environmentally friendly?
So there's many, many, many ways. Just some quick ones are, I always say, try to buy less and buy better. So by that, I talk about, buying from brands that are kind of being traceable and explaining to you what they're doing and kind of how their systems and supply chains work if you can. If you are going to buy from big high street brands because that is what you can afford, send messages back to those CEOs and those boards of what you want from them. So whether that's emailing them in, calling them, asking them questions, or if they do have a conscious line or a more sustainable line, although for the most part, a lot of it is greenwashing, in a way, by buying those ones, you are still sending messages back up to the boardroom that is the type of product people are wanting, which means maybe they'll invest more money and more of their lines into those better practices. There's also buying secondhand, which I think is becoming a more interesting market and more exciting and more fashionable and more sort of chic and cool and not kind of, charity shop-esque, which is what people have seen in the past. So I think there's a lot of exciting things happening in that space. I know as a mother in children's clothing, that's what I do. And it gives me so much joy and pleasure because I don't feel guilty when I'm purchasing the clothes, even if it is from a high street brand like a Zara or whatnot, because it's secondhand. I still feel like I can be playful and fun and the guilt is removed because I haven't bought it, firsthand. So I'd say they're the sort of quickest and easiest and simplest ways to do better. Do better sounds negative. I don't mean it like that. But, I think there's still ways to love fashion, enjoy it, but just to be more considered about what we do and to think about different ways to do it.
My thanks to Amy Pawney and Tansy Hoskins, and to you for listening to the Sky News Daily with me, Sally Lockwood. This episode was produced by Rosie Gillett with Alex Eden. Our editor is Philly Beaumont.